Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Revenue Rebels. I'm Max Greenwald, CEO and founder of Warmly. And today I'm joined by J.D. Miller, a 5-time PE exit veteran and author of The CRO's Guide to Winning in Private Equity. As CRO at companies like Modus and Cantata, J.D. consistently delivered 20% plus growth while pioneering the smarketing approach to unifying revenue teams. Now an operating advisor to PE-backed companies and recently named CRO of the Year for 2024, JD combines his operational expertise with philanthropy through the JD MJA Foundation, earning recognition as one of Chicago's most inspiring individuals. Thanks so much for joining us here today, JD.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Awesome. Of course, I got to ask, talk about the philanthropy stuff first. What earned you Chicago's most inspiring individual?
Oh my gosh, about 14 years ago, I had finished an exit from a company and was trying to find something meaningful to do with my time. And I started volunteering at a homeless shelter down the street that was actually run by a church in Lincoln Park. And the church was slowly going out of business because the homeless program was taking up $2 million of their budget. And so I partnered with the church there to spin it off as a nonprofit that suddenly opened the availability of government sources and private founders who don't want to give money to churches, but are happy to give them to homeless groups. So today it's called Care for Friends. We see about 12,000 homeless guests a year, and we get most of them housed within 6 months of our first contact.
Wow, that's awesome. I think one of the biggest underrated things is having someone smart in the sales and marketing world go into philanthropy. I'm sure you were looking at marketing channels for how people came in the door and other sales analyses, but I think it's really great that you took on that project.
Thanks. Yeah, we started very simple with, here's how to read your balance sheet. The pastor of the church there said, my CFO gives me this spreadsheet every month that, looks at how much we're spending and how much we're bringing in. And I know it's not looking good, but could you help me with some coaching there? And yeah, we kind of turned that around. And actually the church is doing really well, and Care for Friends is. We actually just opened a $10 million new facility right in the heart of Lincoln Park this year. So it's going really well.
And you wrote a book. I mean, that's pretty cool as an author. Tell me a little bit more about the inspiration for that.
Yeah, so in my work as an operating partner with private equity firms, I work for Five Arrows Capital Partners in London. I coach CMOs and CROs of companies of various sizes on how to grow their businesses bigger. And I found that with all of that coaching, I was constantly getting asked the same questions and providing the same advice and templates. So over the course of the last year, every time I worked on annual plans or commission or any of those sorts of things, I stuck it in a file and said, I'm going to put this together in a book. And now in addition to one-on-one coaching, the book is available to everybody. So if you're a CRO or CMO of a high growth company, there's about a dozen actionable templates you can put in place today to help your business grow better.
That's awesome. So our business is about $3 million in revenue, and our head of revenue, Keegan, has done this a couple times with other companies, but going 3 to 10 million, our next big step is going to be hard. At our stage, what is a template or kind of suggestion you would give that might be a little bit outside the box?
So I'll tell you, first of all, congratulations on getting over the 1 million mark, because so many companies don't cross 1 million. So getting to 3, you are well down the path. But I actually talked to a lot of people about the ages and stages of a company. And the biggest lesson to learn is the things that you had to do to get to 1 million and to get to 3 are generally the opposite of things that you have to do to get to 10 and then beyond. I am sure that Keegan is a great seller by themselves and probably still very instrumental with a lot of your key customers and your key deals. When you get closer to the 10 million, all of a sudden you've got to think about, what do you know how to do? What does Keegan know how to do that you can teach other people to do? Because, that 10 million mark and then going beyond, you're going to have hundreds or thousands of customers that you can't personally be involved with. And so giving up the reins of, I've got to be in charge of every deal, and I become more of a manager who empowers other people to do that stuff is a really critical transition there.
Right before this podcast, I was on a weekly product call with our AE team where I teach them lessons learned from the founder of the company and just fun facts about our product and the history of how it was created the way it was. And just last week, we instituted for one of our other co-founders a weekly customer success call doing the exact same thing. And so we're definitely feeling the pains of needing to scale the knowledge in our head to our team. So I definitely empathize with that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the more that you can, give them the actual words you say or the thoughts that you use and document that and codify it, suddenly you'll have half a dozen sellers and a dozen sellers and 100 sellers that are all doing the same things. And then I think the other part of that journey is, once you start building out management teams underneath you, a lot of times you take the top seller and you turn them into the manager of that sales team. And it's a really hard shift for them because again, the things you do as a coach and mentor and manager and leader, so when I was a seller, you loved to be Superman and you loved to have the spotlight on you and have all the company events be about, that big deal that I closed. And all of a sudden the management side is about none of that. And it's about shedding the light on someone else and putting your ego on the side and saying, I'm so happy for the team. And so a lot of people really need to think carefully about, do I really want to move into management? Do I want to lead teams? Or do I want to continue to have a long career, continuing to be a great individual contributor? And, there's nothing that says you need to move up the ranks other than ego. You can have a really successful career doing both.
But one of the interesting things about that is that it's actually not the case on the product and engineering side of the house. So we've had many times in our company's history where our top individual contributor engineer wants to climb in their career and we gave them an opportunity to be manager. And maybe they did good or bad as they're kind of moving into that sort of position. But, the top performing engineer does not make more than the engineering manager. And I actually think that's something that, the product and engineering side of the house could learn from sales.
It's interesting. I do some discussion with graduates at the University of Illinois, went to school, about their career trajectory. And the people who really want to talk about, how do I get a ton of money? I always say the jobs that are closest to the money are the ones that tend to pay the most. And so if you're the salesperson bringing it in, you're going to make a lot of money doing that. If you're, in HR and you're supporting the salespeople who bring it in, you're a little bit step removed. Now, again, you can become an executive and have a fantastic, rewarding career doing anything. And, I don't think money is the only measure that we should think about in our career trajectory, but it was a little rule. It wasn't apparent to me when I was in my early 20s and starting to figure that out.
For sure. So one of the things that we just had our company on site last week in Austin, and we were lucky to be visited by Chris Walker, who is a pretty well-known kind of marketing influencer. And one of the things that he said that surprised me was that in 2025, he feels like the sales commission model is broken. The days where you were giving 50%, of OTE to sellers for landing deals, as well as giving, up to 10, 12% of deals per deal size to sellers, he feels a bit in the past. And the reason he says that is because back in the day, let's say 10, 15 years ago, all sellers were not only full cycle, but full cycle back then meant they were also managing the customers in customer success land. And so sellers would have to find deals, close deals, onboard deals, and then support deals. In the modern era, in the 2020s, we now have SDRs to help us find deals. We have implementation managers to help us onboard customers, and then CSMs to help manage those customers. And thus, the seller is doing a lot less than they used to. Doesn't mean what they're doing isn't super important, but it calls into question the large check sizes that a fully ramped and successful AE can bring in. I'm curious if you've thought about this from the CROs and CMOs that you're talking to around how compensation factors into value each person in the chain is delivering.
That's a really provocative question and a really provocative model. Honestly, I haven't thought that specifically about that piece, other than to say I have really noticed in my own career this sort of bifurcation of the role that, when I started selling web content management in the early 2000s, I did have to cold call, prospect, create the opportunity and close it. And we always handed it off to someone else to do implementation. I'm really curious about the role of AI these days and really how that impacts so much of what sellers do, because all of a sudden, AI is really good at doing account research for you. There's a lot of digital body language you can see about people who might be ready to take a call. AI can craft my message, as you know this. I mean, you run a business about this. AI can craft that, early email or LinkedIn connection. And so it really starts to ask a lot of questions about what is it that only a person can do? And especially in the sales cycle, what is it about the interpersonal relationship building, the trust building, all of that. And I think that we're always going to compensate really well the people who can do things that only a person can do. But how that plays out in commission rates, I haven't taken it all the way to the end there to think that through.
I think that's a fantastic point. I mean, a lot of people are talking about whether or not the SDR role will be automated by AI end-to-end or partially. But at the end of the day, studies will show time and time again, nobody's signing a 20K plus check without talking to a human being on the other side. And so the role of the closer, the one who gets the contract over the line, is not going anywhere anytime soon. And it's really interesting, like you said, to think about if we have fewer roles available in a company, will those people, those humans still left at these companies, be paid way more because of just how valuable their contribution to the company is? Slash, you have more money to go around because you're making probably higher margins from ultra cheap AI bots doing a lot of the work for you.
Yeah. And I think that's the case. And of course, I have a PhD in communication. And so I have a natural bias that says, person to person communication is always going to be really important to us. But I do think, we talk about it in the sales realm, we see it in the engineering side as well, that, can I use ChatGPT or AI to write code? Sure. Can I use it to write really complex developed code? Maybe. But it really takes a really smart engineer to understand, what's the overall framework of the product, what's the roadmap of the company strategically, where are we trying to take this? And yes, you can write code today, but are you writing code that's thinking about where we're going in the future? I always think there's going to be a role for a human being in there, and smart people who have great talent, I always think demand, great compensation.
Speaking of great talent, I feel like there's a quality and a qualitative and a quantitative approach to a sales process. And I've noticed that sellers kind of fall into just two main buckets of types of sellers. You got the relationship sellers who are the qualitative, really get to know you, chummy, take you out to basketball games style of selling, which is important, has merit. And then you have the quantitative seller who's really focused on the ROI, outcome, business case, technical implementation, and details of your specifics, also really valuable. The technical seller, I see typically getting more into revenue operations. There's a new title right now called the go-to-market engineer, and it's really like hacking together, AI tools, automation to drive their sales process. Makes it easier to drive top of funnel, but maybe harder to kind of close deals. And then vice versa, that relationship seller, is kind of leaning on their SDR to drive pipeline for them, but they get a deal in the door and they are texting them and they are, buying them little gifts for their spouse and kids, and I think maybe have even a higher close rate. Talk to me just like a little bit about, you're a seller today, do you work on your quantitative skills or your qualitative skills or a mix of both? What does the modern seller look like in the back half of the 2020s?
Yeah, I do think it's a mix of both, but I also think it's a factor of what is the product that you're selling and what's the price point. Because if I'm selling a piece of software that's $1,000 a year, a buyer is going to be really happy to take a risk on, I saw an interesting video, I got an email, or, I liked the seller who came and brought me a box of cookies, and that relationship was really important. If I'm buying a $10 million ERP system that's going to, fundamentally run my business, I better really have a really strong ROI and understanding of, the financial implications and all of that. But I also have had to have that really interpersonal thing happen that I'm going to spend the next 5 years working with this company. We're not going to rip it out. Do I know the people? Do I trust them? Do they understand me really well? So at the end of the day, I think if you're moving from a transactional sale and you're doing more enterprise kinds of deals, a seller who both has the data acumen to talk about metrics and ROI and the interpersonal communication skills, it's really important. And then I think the other thing as we move into enterprise sales, Challenger and CEB has taught us that the number of decision makers continues to go up every year. So right now, there's an average of 8 to 15 decision makers involved in kind of enterprise software decision making. So again, and with my communication bias, who can really manage group communication, who can manage all the personalities and see the interpersonal dynamics of, Max loves it, but JD doesn't, but who has power and how do I make them work together is a really critical, kind of skill that I still think there's a role for people to play the best.
It's a great point. At the end of the day, you're buying software from people, by people, for people, not two AIs battling it out to get something in the door.
And I talk to my teams too about, there's often two levels of conversation happening in a sales cycle too about, yes, we're going to sell you a $3 million ERP system, and we better have a really good business case that explains why you're going to be so much more efficient and all of that. At the same time, there's also someone sitting in finance that, is thinking, I'm going to be tasked with this, and this is going to be the career-making project for me. And, which vendor am I going to trust? With my career future. Or sometimes there's, some finance clerk type person who's looking at the solution saying, this is going to put me out of a job. And I don't want any of that in there. When you're running a sales process, it's not just, on the merits of should you buy this product or not. You have all these other agendas that you have to make a win for everyone else coming to the table too.
JD, I want to move on now to talking about CROs, which I think we'll have a lot listening on this call. The average length of time of a CRO is 18 months. That doesn't seem like very long. How do you think about a CRO's tenure and goals within an organization, as well as how do you at the board level communicate their value and worth to ensure long-term mutual success?
Yeah. So I've been a CRO multiple times, and that's a stat that I spend a lot of time and focus on because actually that tenure of a CRO has been declining a lot over the last years. So yeah, it is hovering about 18 months now. And I think it's easy for people to think that, oh, this CRO is coming in and getting fired a year and a half later because they didn't make the number. And fundamentally, I don't think that's the truth, especially now that I, advise companies, I sit on company boards. It's not necessarily that you missed the number, it's that you weren't able to tell people what the number is going to be. By definition, if we're hiring a new CRO into the company, something is going wrong. We want a change in sales. And so it'd be unrealistic for me to think you can walk in the door and overnight, suddenly change what's happening there. But what we really do want you to do is diagnose what the problem is, tell us what the roadmap is, and give us a clear communication of, maybe I'm not going to hit the number this year. Maybe we're not going to hit the goal next year, but here's the numbers that we do think are realistic. Because as a result, I now know, can I invest more money or not? The worst thing that happens for CROs is they come in and they're afraid to deliver bad news. And so they promise their board, we're going to exceed by, $2 million, $3 million, whatever it is. And the board's waiting on that. And then the last month of the quarter or the last, week of the year, they say, oh, we were so disappointed. This big giant deal fell through. And we're in a terrible situation because, we kind of pre-spent all of that money. If you had come in early and said, we're going to miss this number, but here's what I think is really good. Okay, great. We can adjust. We can manage on that. And I think the CROs who show you what the weather is going to be, whether it's raining or not, are going to have a long career to stand there, with the umbrella, or however that analogy might work out.
If you're a new CRO and you have 90 days to get back to the board on what the problem is and how to fix it, what kind of questions are you asking the other leaders in the team who are more tenured to try to diagnose those problems?
So when I start in a new organization, I like to go just start with a very open mind and just ask executives, colleagues, managers, and our sellers, what do you think is working? What do you think is not working? And you get a whole kind of lot of qualitative stuff there. I'd actually do a little sticky note exercise where we put the good things in green and the bad things in red, and we've got kind of groupings. And then I want to go find data that's going to affirm or deny what they told me. I started at a company a couple of years ago now, where they recruited me and everyone said, it's a sales problem. The sales team doesn't have the right skill. And so I walked in with this mindset expecting I was going to have to teach a lot of new sales skills. When I looked at the data, actually the win rates for the sellers were really very high. It was our pipeline that wasn't doing so well. They were winning 35, 40% of their deals, which would say you have to have 2.5, maybe three times your goal in pipeline. And they had 1.2 times their goal in pipeline. So sometimes the qualitative, what people say is the problem, the data shows you something different. And so using that first 90 days to really get both, and then be able to come to the board and have a candid discussion about, here's what you think the problem is, here's what the data says the problem is, and here's the bet that I'm making. So for the next 90 days, maybe I'm going to do some sales training because you wanted me to do that. But actually, I'm really going to double down on lead gen and pipeline generation stuff too. And let's see how that bet plays out.
Who is worth taking a bet on as a first-time CRO? Maybe I can't afford the veteran three-time, CRO type. If I'm going to make a bet on someone, and I'm open to promoting internally too, of course, but what's the right archetype of somebody who makes for an excellent first-time CRO?
I think it can be a hard job. I do think someone who has good data acumen, once have a C in front of your title, you have financial responsibility for the company, and you have to be able to show up at the board and read the balance sheets and understand the financial implications and do all of that planning. At the same time, you have to be not so far away from sales that your sellers don't want to follow you or think you're just, some finance or private equity wonk. But, you still have to have the confidence from your sales team that, yes, if you had to, you could jump in a sales call and do it. You can definitely coach your sellers how to do stuff really well, and they want to follow where you lead. And so I think it's kind of balancing both of those. I think a lot of times you get one or the other. And I think a lot of people tend to hire the super seller who, comes in and wants to take over every deal and close every deal themselves. And I think that's a mistake because then the company's growth is kind of capped by how far is my personal span of control, and how many deals can I personally do instead of empowering the rest of the folks while I start doing the strategic stuff that only I know how to do.
We talked about how like the same stuff you did as an independent contributor may not be the same stuff you need as a manager. Kind of going up to the kind of executive level, to what extent, I guess, would you recommend a new CRO as a servant leader? Should they get in there and in the first 90 days close their own deal? And I'll give you an example. We just hired a head of engineering, and we all felt it was very important that he goes and solves a bug. He gets in the code, he gets his hands dirty and solves a bug. And I love it as an exercise. I think it's like a really great way to kind of prove to the troops you can handle it. But that's not really the skill that you're brought in to do. I mean, on the revenue side, you're brought in to think strategy, to read the financial forecast, to do forecasting. What does servant leadership look like at the CRO level? And is there a place for it, if at all?
Yeah, I certainly think, solving the bug or closing a deal does create a lot of credibility amongst that team that you know what you're talking about. I actually talk in my book a lot about training. And my father was a surgeon. And I asked my dad, how did you learn how to do this particular surgery? Now, you've got to remember, Dad went to school, med school in the 60s, so it was a little bit different then. But he said, we had this process called watch one, do one, teach one. Now, certainly I hope that we're watching a lot more than one surgery before we start handing over the scalpels today. But I actually think when I'm teaching salespeople skills, it is valuable for them to watch me do one. But they really should just watch me do one. And then the next time I might be in the room, should be in the room, but the next time I'm having them do the work with me kind of behind as a stopgap and someone who can help so that they don't get into too much trouble. And then at the end, let them go off and run and they don't need me at all because they can go teach everyone else. I also worked with a military leader who always said, empower your team to make mistakes. Your job as the leader is to figure out which mistakes are they just going to lose a finger and which mistakes are they going to lose a whole arm on. Now, I don't want to lose my fingers either, but kind of, making that judgment with sellers on how can I let you screw up this deal? Because it's just going to extend the sales cycle 2 or 3 weeks, or it's a small account that we don't care about anyway, versus which are the deals that I absolutely have to grab the reins and make sure that we don't mess up, I think is sort of the dynamic that this kind of leader needs to think through.
Migrating away from the CRO, let's head over to the CEO. When do founders need to break up with their sales org? And I ask this especially because I, at 3 million in ARR, am being told by my head of revenue that I'm not allowed to teach sellers how I close anymore. I can't tell them about, my demo or discovery process. The only thing I'm allowed to do is train sellers on the product. And I kind of agree with him. I think he's right. But from your perspective, how do you think about separating the founder from go-to-market? And I, in my own company, am the go-to-market side founder. So it'd be helpful coaching for me.
Yeah. So I worked for a CEO once who grew up through the finance ranks, and he really instilled in me that you need to be able to delegate every piece of work down to the lowest paid person who's capable of doing the work. And when you do that, when you're delegating stuff down, it then leaves you available to do the things that only you know how to do. And so I'm actually working with a client organization right now who's got the same issue, that the CEO started in sales and was the head of sales and eventually promoted up and became the CEO and has hired someone to lead the sales team. And one of the big things we're talking about is you hired someone to lead the sales team so you don't have to do it, because only you can now do the CEO work of product vision, strategy, go talk to the investors, go get the money that you need for the next round of financing. And so it's not that you couldn't go teach your sellers how to do something, but if you're spending an hour of day training, something someone else can teach them to do, it's an hour of the day that you're missing doing what only you know how to do for the business. And, I do think in this sort of, in this growth to 10 million that you're on, the clearer you can get about that and what is the thing that only you know how to do, how do you then teach someone else to do that so you're freed up to do something else is, maybe going to lead to that great divorce.
Yeah, I think that's great. The maybe rare instance where divorce is sort of celebrated instead of seen as maybe a failure.
And hopefully, you hired a sales leader that you like and you're going to want to be collaborating on the team, but hopefully you hired a sales leader that you trust and you don't need to be in their business all the time too.
When you say, do things that you're, particularly excellent at or that only you can do, to be honest, sometimes I find myself avoiding the hard work and then getting deeper into the business and saying, I can just help this AE win this deal, or, I can do a competitor battle card or something. because I know that I can accomplish it, right? It's like something that like I know I can do. I feel good. I get a gold star. My AE's happy. My RevOps person's happy, and I feel like I'm being a good CEO or a good founder. And that's a hard thing, I think, for founders especially to continually swallow, is that they have to keep eating their vegetables all the time.
Yeah. And, again, it's this, we're humans at the end of the day. I talk a lot about leading at the intersection of business, technology, and humanity. And the human part of that is, I've done some things that get me rewarded. And so I want to keep doing the things that give me the reward of feeling good or having fun or whatever that is. I think the leadership side is sometimes recognizing the context has shifted and we no longer need you to do that. We need you to do something else. I'm sitting in Chicago today. It's freezing cold, and we adopted a dog in our family a while ago. Now she has learned that she can go to the back door and ring the bell and get let out in the yard and run around and have fun. And so that's been her routine and that's been her reward is go ring the bell, you get to go do what you want to do. All of a sudden, it's 8 below zeros today in Chicago. So she rings the bell and I have to say, we're not opening the door yet. First, I got to go, wrestle you into a coat or a sweater or something like that. She doesn't like it. It's not fun to her. And she hasn't realized like it's actually for your benefit. And I think sometimes that's the same thing at work too, is, I used to do this thing. I used to be on every sales call. I've gotten really good at it. It feels like a lot of fun to me. But now maybe I don't need to go do that thing anymore. I need to go put on my sweater and go make some other plan.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about, right, the excellent IC AE who's so good at selling, they're going to make President's Club every quarter, choosing not to go into management because they're just so good at that skill. The weird thing about being a founder I've seen is that I'm forced to get into management, or I'm forced to kind of grow with the company if I want to still be here, and that it's unfortunately never going to be the right answer for me to be the star AE for all time for the company. Things just won't scale that way.
And the world changes behind us. I began my career selling web content management software in the early 2000s, where we automated a lot of people's jobs that, no longer were you going to call a 1-800 number to buy an airline ticket. You're going to go to a website and buy it yourself. And so people who, were on the other end of that 1-800 ticketing thing, they had to evolve with the company. And, we talked about it now with AI and SDR work. Do I think every SDR job is going to go away? Probably not, but are a lot of them going to go away because AI can do it? Probably. And so if I'm sitting in an SDR seat today, how do I keep evolving my skills so that a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when the context has changed, I'm still relevant and having value to add to the company?
Wrapping things up, I guess I'll end with this, JD, which is maybe talk to us about a prediction or two about the CRO role in 2025 and beyond. What are some things we should be looking out for or doing to be the best CROs we can be?
Yeah, so I think, CROs this year, as in every year, the more you can give people the gift of time and visibility into where the business is going, the better it's going to be for you and your companies. Here in the US, we have a new president taking office. We're starting to learn what all the economic implications of this administration is going to be. Globally, we see a lot of that stuff changing. And so the context that our businesses are operating in are going to shift, some of them better, some of them worse. The best CROs are the ones who are able to not just tell you, what am I selling today and what's today's pipeline, but getting some visibility into 3 months from now, 6 months from now. What do we know that we know is going to happen in the business? And then kind of what's our upside downside and how might we adapt? If you can provide your companies with vision and visibility and time to adjust to whatever the changes are, you're going to have a great career.
Awesome. JD, thank you so much for being with us. This has been an awesome episode of Revenue Rebels, and we look forward to hearing from you again shortly.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Bye.